Most people who do something terrible spend the rest of their lives trying to hide what they felt in the moment they did it. They bury it. They deny it. They rewrite it, even to themselves. Alyssa Bustamante did the opposite. She wrote it down. In her own diary, in her own handwriting, a 15-year-old described taking a life. And she didn't describe it with fear, or guilt, or panic. She called the experience, and these are her words, amazing. She wrote that once you get past the feeling that you can't do it, it becomes, in her phrasing, pretty enjoyable. Now, sit with something for a second. That entry wasn't written for a jury. It wasn't a performance for the police. It wasn't a story she was telling to make herself look a certain way. It was private. It was meant for no one. And that is exactly what makes it so disturbing. Because private words don't lie the way public ones do. If the last case we looked at asked whether a child could feel nothing at all, this one asks something darker. What happens when a child feels something, and what they feel is pleasure? This is the case of Alyssa Bustamante, and I need to be honest with you up front. Nothing about it is simple. Every time you think you've decided what she was, the case hands you a fact that pulls you the other way. So stay with me, because the whole point of this story is that it refuses to let you settle. Alyssa grew up in St. Martin's, a small community in Missouri. Quiet. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids play in each other's yards, and parents don't think twice about it. On the surface, hers was not the story you'd expect to end the way it did. But underneath that surface, the warning signs had been flashing for years. She had a documented history of depression, a history of self-harm. She had attempted to take her own life at the age of 13, 2 full years before the events we're talking about. At the time of the crime, she was taking prescribed antidepressant medication. And I want you to notice something about that, because it matters. This was not a child the system had overlooked. This was not a kid who slipped through the cracks with nobody watching. This was a child the system had already identified, already treated, already tried to help. And that is the first uncomfortable layer of this case. Because everything we normally point to and say, there, that's the red flag, that's the thing everyone missed, was already on the record. Nobody missed it. The pain was documented. The struggle was real. Professionals were involved. So how do you take a genuinely troubled, genuinely hurting teenager, a child in real psychological distress, and square that with what she was about to do? Hold on to that question. Because here is where it stops being a story about a struggling kid and becomes something else entirely. Days before the crime, Alyssa went into the woods near her home and dug 2 shallow graves. Not 1, 2. And not in a moment of rage. Not in a blackout. Not in some sudden spiral she couldn't control. Days in advance. She prepared the ground for a body before there was a body. I want you to really understand why that one detail is so important, because it quietly changes how you have to read everything else in this story. An impulsive act, a moment of panic, a fight that goes too far, leaves a certain kind of evidence behind. Chaos, mess, things that weren't planned. But preparation is different. Preparation is patient. Preparation means the idea existed, fully formed, in someone's mind, and then they walked into the woods with a shovel and made it real, and then they went home, and ate dinner, and went to school, and waited. That's not a mind that lost control. That's a mind that made a decision and gave it time. The person on the other side of that decision was a little girl named Elizabeth Olten. She was 9 years old. She was a neighbor. She was, by every account, exactly what a 9-year-old is supposed to be. Trusting of the older kids around her. the way younger children instinctively trust the bigger ones, because at that age, older still means safer. In October of 2009, Elizabeth was led away from her home, under the impression that she was going to meet a friend. She was taken into the woods, and she never came back. I'm not going to walk you through the details of what happened to her out there. That's not what this channel is. And honestly, it's not what matters for understanding this case. The gruesome specifics don't teach you anything about the mind we're trying to understand. What that mind did afterward, that teaches you everything. Because when Elizabeth didn't come home, the community did what any community does. They panicked. And then they mobilized. Neighbors, families, volunteers, police, all of them out in the fading light, combing the woods and the fields and the roadsides, calling her name, searching for any sign of a missing 9-year-old girl. And here's the part I need you to brace for. Alyssa searched too. Think about what that actually means. The one person on this earth who knew exactly where Elizabeth was, who had walked that ground days earlier and prepared it, stood shoulder to shoulder with the very people desperately looking for her. She joined the search. She moved through the trees with everyone else, and she said nothing. To every worried face around her, she was just another frightened teenager, helping the grown-ups look for a missing child. She wore that perfectly. That's the second layer of this case. It's not only what happened in the woods, it's the calm that came after it. The ability to stand inside a whole community's grief and terror, to be surrounded by it, breathing it in, and to feel completely separate from it, to feel nothing where everyone else is falling apart. That kind of composure, in a 15-year-old, is not normal, and it's the thing investigators would later struggle to explain. But Alyssa made one mistake. One. And it's the entire reason we know what was actually happening behind that composed face. She wrote it down. When investigators eventually began to focus on her, they found her diary, and inside it was an entry, written the night of the crime, describing what she had done and how it had made her feel. That she had, in her own words, just killed somebody. That it was amazing. That once you get past that initial feeling of not being able to do it, it becomes enjoyable. Prosecutors would later read those words aloud in a courtroom, and I've read a lot of case files, and I can tell you that words like that land in a courtroom with a weight that's genuinely hard to describe. Here's why they hit so hard. A confession under pressure. That's one thing. People say all kinds of things when they're frightened, cornered, exhausted, trying to save themselves. Investigators know to be careful with those. But this wasn't a confession. Nobody pressured this out of her. This was a private record, written for herself, in a moment when she believed no one would ever read it. And that's the terrible power of it. We tell the truth to our diaries in a way we never tell it to anyone else. So those words didn't feel like a story she was spinning. They felt like the truth, the unguarded, unperformed truth of what was actually inside her. For investigators, that diary transformed the entire case. It stopped being just evidence that she had done it. It became a window into how little the act had cost her, emotionally, in the moment. The distance between what she had done and what she felt about doing it. That distance was the whole case. That gap was the mystery. And then it moved to the courtroom, where that exact same gap stopped being a mystery and became a fight. Because look at the two things a jury was being asked to hold at the same time. On one side, a documented, genuinely troubled teenager. A real history of depression, real self-harm, a previous suicide attempt at 13, prescribed medication. The defense pointed to all of it. They raised arguments about how certain antidepressants can affect a developing adolescent brain, How a mind that isn't finished forming can be pushed in directions we don't fully understand. Their picture was of a damaged child. Not a monster, a kid the world had already broken before any of this happened. On the other side, two graves, dug days in advance. A 9-year-old lured away from her home. A teenager who joined the search for her own victim without flinching. And a diary that used the word enjoyable. So how do you weigh those against each other? Genuinely, how? That is the question that made this case so difficult, and it's why it's still studied and argued about today. Was Alyssa Bustamante a broken child whose pain curdled into something monstrous? Or was the pain completely real and the coldness completely real at the very same time? Both of them living inside one 15-year-old, neither one canceling the other out. Because that's the possibility we don't like to look at. We want it to be one or the other, damaged or dangerous, victim or villain. It's so much easier when it's one. This case refuses to be one. In 2012, Alyssa Bustamante pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And at her sentencing, she apologized. She expressed remorse. She spoke to Elizabeth's family. And even the apology, became part of the debate. Because which one was the real her? The girl in the diary, writing that it felt amazing? Or the young woman in the courtroom, years later, saying she was sorry? People have argued over that ever since. And here's the honest, uncomfortable answer. Both of them can be real. A person can feel nothing in the moment and feel something years later, once the moment is long gone and the weight of it finally arrives. Those two things are not a contradiction, and the fact that they can both be true at once is exactly what makes the human mind so nearly impossible to judge from the outside. That's what the Bustamante case leaves you holding. Not a clean answer, a deeply uncomfortable question. When a troubled child does something like this, are we looking at a mind that broke, or a mind that was always capable of this, and simply waited for its moment? And if you line these cases up, a pattern starts to emerge that's harder to stomach than any single one of them. One young killer felt nothing at all, and told us so, plainly, without flinching. Bustamante felt something, and the something she felt was the wrong thing entirely. But there's a third possibility, and it might be the most chilling of the three. A child who doesn't kill once, a child who kills again and treats it as ordinary, as routine, as nothing worth losing sleep over. That takes us to Rhode Island, and to a boy considered one of the youngest serial killers in American history. He committed his first killing at 13. And when he was finally caught, the thing that unsettled investigators most wasn't what he had done. It was how completely, casually normal he seemed while talking about it. His name was Craig Price, and his story is next.